Commander John McCain was shot down over Hanoi on October 26, 1967. He was flying his 23rd bombing mission over communist North Vietnam. His Skyhawk bomber was struck by a missile. Lieutenant Commander McCain fractured both arms and a leg ejecting from the aircraft. After parachuting into a lake, he was pulled ashore by the North Vietnamese. He said they crushed his shoulder with a rifle butt and bayoneted him. He was transported to Hanoi's main prison, nicknamed Hanoi Hilton. According to Mr. McCain's biography, his North Vietnamese captors refused to treat his injuries. He was beaten and interrogated. Upon discovering that his father was a U.S. Navy admiral, the North Vietnamese finally gave him marginal medical care during 6 weeks in a hospital. Later, he was sent to a POW camp on the outskirts of Hanoi and placed in a cell with 2 other American POWs. In March 1968, McCain was placed in solitary confinement for 2 years. The North Vietnamese offered McCain early release because they wanted to use it for propaganda purposes. He turned down the offer and told his captors that he would only accept the offer on the condition that all other American POWs were released too. Mr. McCain said the North Vietnamese started in mid-1968 a campaign of severe torture that included beatings every 2 hours. He was a prisoner of war for 5.5 years. He was released on March 14, 1973. McCain returned to the USA as a war hero. One of the most memorable photographs from that era was McCain walking on crutches to meet President Richard Nixon. After moving to Arizona in the late 1970s, John McCain won the support of powerful businessmen such as Charles Keating Jr. and Fife Symington III, who encouraged him to run for the U.S. Congress. McCain won a congressional seat in 1982 despite being a newcomer to the state. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1986. Because of his war hero status, John McCain has been politically untouchable in Arizona and nationally. That may change. Trunews has obtained the original recording of a radio broadcast by Lieutenant Commander John McCain while held as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. The recording has never been heard by the American people. In the recording, Lieutenant Commander McCain confessed to being guilty of crimes against the Vietnamese people by bombing their cities, towns, and villages and killing civilians. He also commended the communists for the excellent medical care they gave him after he was shot down over Hanoi. He expressed his deep gratitude to the North Vietnamese communist regime for caring for him. The audio confession was recorded and broadcast on North Vietnamese radio as propaganda to demoralize American troops in South Vietnam. The audio confession was recorded on June 2nd, 1969. I repeat, this audio recording has never been heard by the American people. You are hearing it for the first time on Trunews. Here is the never heard before audio of John McCain confessing that he was a war criminal and thanking his communist captors for their medical treatment of his war injuries.
To the Vietnamese people and the government of the DRVN, from John Sidney McCain, 624787, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, born 29 August 1936, Panama, home state, Oregon. Shot down 26 October 1967, A-4E aircraft. I, as a U.S. airman, am guilty of crimes against the Vietnamese country and people. I have bombed their cities, towns, and villages and caused many injuries, even death, to the people of Vietnam. I was captured in the capital city of Hanoi while attacking it. After I was captured, I was taken to the hospital in Hanoi, where I received very good medical treatment. I was getting an operation on my leg, which allowed me to walk again, and a cast on my right arm, which was badly broken in 3 places. The doctors were very good, and they knew a great deal about the practice of medicine. I remained in the hospital for some time and regained much of my health and strength. Since I arrived in the camp of detention, I have received humane and lenient treatment. I received discount treatment and food, even though I came here as an aggressor, and the people who I injured have much difficulty in their living standards. I wish to express my deep gratitude for my kind treatment, and I will never forget this kindness extended to me.
And again, that is an audio recording of John McCain as a prisoner of war. That recording was broadcast on North Vietnamese radio in the late 1960s to demoralize American troops in Vietnam. This recording has never been heard by the American people. The investigative journalist who brought this audio to Trunews is in the studio right now with Doc Burkhart and Edward Zoll and myself. His name is Charles Johnson. He is the founder of WeSearchR.com and GotNews.com. Charles, welcome to True News.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Charles, I know right now that the True News audience is in a state of shock by what they just heard. What we just heard was the voice of John McCain in a broadcast on North Vietnamese Communist radio in the late 60s, confessing that he was a war criminal and praising the North Vietnamese communists for the excellent care they had given him. And I know our audience is shaking their heads in disbelief, wondering, is this for real? How do we know this is John McCain? Charles, you convinced me and the True News staff that this is an authentic recording. And we decided to release it tonight. That's why this program is being released somewhat late in the day, because we had a lot of discussions today about whether to release this audio. I mean, my gosh, we're talking about John McCain.
Right.
And for me, this has been a very difficult choice to make, a very difficult decision to make. Do we release this audio? Why are you certain that this audio is authentic, that this is the voice of John McCain?
We obtained the audio recording from the National Archives. It is
the National Archives in Washington, D.C.?
Correct. And it was actually mislabeled while it was there.
You're telling me that the National Archives of the United States of America had a recording of John McCain on North Vietnamese radio?
That's right. And what's more is that this broadcast comes from the Foreign Broadcast Information Service, which was a branch.
That was the CIA.
This branch of the CIA.
They monitored all shortwave radio.
That's right. And so
and they were out of Panama for a long time.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. That's right. Yeah. And so for a very long time, there had been a number of U.S. servicemen who had claimed that they had heard John McCain essentially doing a Tokyo Rose style betrayal of his country. And these servicemen were more or less ignored. They were marginalized, and they were sort of cast aside as kooks and cranks. And so I had known that this audio was out there. And so about 6 or 7 months ago at Got News, we put up a bounty to anyone who could go and prove it. And we did this in the context of investigating and vetting John McCain more fully. John McCain has a history of being on sort of the wrong side of a lot of military conflicts, notably, and most recently, the Syria conflict, in which he hired a woman who lied about having a PhD and who was being paid by the Syrian rebels, Elizabeth Obagi, to advise him on foreign policy-related issues. She still works in his office.
He also gets his photograph taken with the wrong people in war, like ISIS jihadists.
That's right, and Elizabeth Obagi is the woman who introduced John McCain to those ISIS-supported rebels.
And then he also showed up in Ukraine and Kiev and encouraged the people of Ukraine to overthrow the elected government.
That's right. And he's also pictured in Ukraine with Obagi. And so I first encountered Ms. Obagi when I was reporting about how she had a history of fabricating a PhD, and she was connected to the neoconservative think tank, the Institute for the Study of War. And so I had heard all these rumors for many years of John McCain, as a songbird. There was a long kind of history of this. And I, wanted to do something about it. I wanted to go. And what was interesting was I had heard for a long time in the researcher community that this material was out there. There was interviews that John McCain had done in French, or for French broadcast. There were interviews he'd done with other kind of communist outlets, and it was never sort of disclosed to the larger public. And I think it's important for people to understand this. This is a breach of the U.S. military code of conduct. This is a form of treason, and this is not. A lot of people are of the view this could have been made under duress. John McCain gave other interviews, such as to a Cuban Journalist Association propaganda operation called Granma. We have, and I've sent over to Edward. And
I don't know about this one.
Yeah.
What was this interview?
This was another interview he did. It was a very matter of fact describing his treatment while
he gave this interview while he was a POW?
Correct.
To the Cuban news agency?
Correct. Yeah. So
is this an audio or
this is a print recording one, and I've sent it over to it's been translated to Edward.
We have the translation?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have it right now, Edward? How long is it?
It's probably about 15-minute read or so.
Oh, okay. We're not. Yeah, we can't read the whole thing.
Do another story.
All right, but we'll release it. We'll put it out on our website. After World War II, the U.S. government prosecuted and convicted and imprisoned Tokyo Rose.
That's right.
Tokyo Rose, the famous traitor in World War II, who made radio broadcasts.
Yes.
In the Pacific to demoralize American troops during World War II.
And if I remember right, they made a really big deal about it too. They paraded her out in all the different media forums back then, and made a really big deal out of prosecuting her as well.
That's right, and it's important to note here that Pulitzer Prize winner Sidney Schalberg, New York Times, late reporter who recently passed away, he had always talked about this sort of cover-up that had gone on, that we had left people behind in Vietnam. And he was more or less ignored, despite winning the Pulitzer Prize for The Killing Fields, which he did on the genocide in Cambodia. He was more or less ignored on this issue because the U.S. government didn't want to acknowledge, they very much wanted heroes out of the Vietnam War. And John McCain, good-looking, boyish, despite being relatively older at the time, the son of an admiral and the grandson of an admiral sort of fit that to a T. And there were lots of photo ops, and people wanted to believe a lot of the stories that were being told about John McCain's military service, and they continue to believe that.
Well, Charles, I'm in my 18th year of radio, and in the early years of this program, Trunews listeners who served in Vietnam would call me. Some personally visited our office, others emailed and said, look, a big story is John McCain. He was a Tokyo Rose, and you need to do this story. I would never touch it because it was like, you're talking about John McCain. I am not doing a report based on hearsay.
Right. And how do you prove it?
Yeah, it was hearsay. I had somebody saying, I know that he was a Tokyo Rose. But this is the first time the actual recording of a North Vietnamese communist radio program has been heard, with John McCain confessing to being a war criminal and praising his captors for the excellent way they treated him. We don't know how many times that recording was rebroadcast over and over and over on North Vietnamese radio.
That's right. There are estimates that it was as many as 30 times, maybe more. But we don't really know. We know that our servicemen heard it in the jungles of Vietnam, that it was used as a propaganda victory. And what was interesting to me is, I remember reading an interview with one of John McCain's captors during the 2008 election, a Vietnamese, person who liked John McCain. He actually said all these favorable things about John McCain. It was sort of this interview of a torturer coming and being friends with torturee. But the Vietnamese officer was insistent that John McCain had not been tortured, that John McCain had been very cooperative. And this was sort of the first time I had ever seen any documentation of it. And we had somebody actually over in Vietnam already, and we're going to be pulling out more material as well. But it's going to be a very interesting story. I mean, my interest is your interest, and part of the reason got to be friendly with Edward was, my view is that we should just let people know the truth, and they can judge for themselves what they would do in that circumstance. I mean, there are many examples of American servicemen, including the subject of the film Unbroken, Mr. Zamperini, who did not do propaganda broadcasts for the Japanese. There are many POWs who, for years, have wanted to tell the story about John McCain, and John McCain, as a member of the government, has worked to seal the records of POWs, including his own. And it's about time to actually see some of those things. I mean,
why are the records sealed?
It's a great question. I mean, so this is,
he has worked to seal the records of all POWs?
Correct. And that would include his own. So Ron Unz over at Unz Review has written about this. It's UNZ for listeners out there interested in this. And he's written a number of articles about this that show that John McCain worked diligently to make it so that the records of servicemen who were POWs are not revealed.
All right, Charles, I want to play the audio again. What we did, now the first time, what you heard was the actual raw audio as it was given to us. I asked our team if they could enhance the audio level and bring it up a little bit. This is a very old recording. Again, this is what, 1960, 67, or was it 67 or 69?
69.
69, 1969. It's a very old recording. So I'm going to play this time a slightly enhanced audio version that may help you hear this a little bit better. Here it is again.
To the Vietnamese people and the government of the DRVN. From John Sidney McCain, 624787, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, born 29 August 1936, Panama, home state, Florida. Shot down 26 October 1967, A4E aircraft. I, as a U.S. Airman, am guilty of crimes against the Vietnamese country and people. I have bombed their cities, towns, and villages and caused many injuries, even death, to the people of Vietnam. I was captured in the capital city of Hanoi while attacking it. After I was captured, I was taken to the hospital in Hanoi, where I received very good medical treatment. I was given an operation on my leg, which allowed me to walk again, and a cast on my right arm, which was badly broken in 3 places. The doctors were very good, and they knew a great deal about the practice of medicine. I remained in the hospital for some time and regained much of my health and strength. Since I arrived in the camp of detention, I have received humane and lenient treatment. I received medical treatment and food even though I came here as an aggressor, and the people who I injured have much difficulty in their living standards. I wish to express my deep gratitude for my kind treatment, and I will never forget this kindness extended to me.
Doc, what was your first reaction when you heard this audio?
When I first heard it, I immediately recognized John McCain's voice. I really did not want to believe it. I was taking kind of the devil's advocate point of view on this particular audio that we were listening to just now, in that, why hasn't this been brought to light before this time? Why now? Why has not someone else gotten this information and published it before? But it's unmistakable in the John McCain's voice on there. But what is chilling to me is his confession to crimes. And just so people understand, we have several people that have served in the military here in the studio, and we've got tons of listeners, tons of veterans out there. You know what they have done to soldiers who have confessed to crimes of aiding and abetting the enemy. They've prosecuted them. They've prosecuted those soldiers. They've prosecuted those sailors. And for this confession to come out at this time, you have to understand Senator McCain has built his entire career on the legacy of being a hero. And then we have this segment where he confesses to a crime. This, it makes me angry, really.
And just to account for our audience, the crime, and referring back to the Code of Conduct, the U.S. military, U.S. States Armed Forces, Section 3, if I am captured, I will continue to resist by all means available. I will make every effort to escape and aid others to escape. I will accept neither parole nor special favors from the enemy. Section 4, if I become a prisoner of war, I will keep faith with my fellow prisoners. I will give no information or take part in any action which might be harmful to my comrades. If I am senior, I will take command. If not, I will obey the lawful orders of those appointed over me and will back them up in every way.
Yeah, this is significant because what this effectively did by this being broadcast out there is it demoralized American troops that were fighting valiantly on the field of battle there in Vietnam. And the airwave propaganda war that was going on was critical to a lot of the success that the Red Chinese and the Vietnamese were gaining out there in the hearts and minds of American soldiers. They were getting demoralized. They were getting depressed. They were hearing these messages broadcast over and over again. And, I thank our veterans and soldiers and sailors out there that for years held on to the idea. I heard this. I actually heard this with my ears. I know it's out there. I know it exists. You finally have your redemption today. It does exist.
That's interesting, Doc. Are we going to hear from U.S. vets who were in Vietnam and with their own ears heard John McCain on Vietnamese radio? I think you're right. I think somebody's going to come forward because most likely they were afraid to say it.
Well, even if they had heard in the past
Nobody
and
would
told
believe
others,
them.
how would you prove it?
Nobody would believe them. This is a very difficult program for me to do. I think if John McCain had told the American people all along, hey, they tortured me, I broke, I made recordings that I wish I never made. I couldn't take the pressure. I couldn't take the torture. I think we all would have forgiven him. Nobody would have held that against him. The American people are forgiving people.
So long as they have the full story, though.
Is you have the whole full story. But he never told us that part of the story. We were always told he was the POW who was tortured and never broke.
Yeah, he's been cashing in at the War Hero Bank for 50 years, and now this makes him overdrawn.
And he's used the POW cover to prevent anybody from criticizing him politically.
Right.
Well, he's facing a very stiff challenge in the Arizona primary. Dr. Kelly Ward from Lake Havasu is running against him, and the Arizona Republican primary is August 30th. John McCain turns age 80 on August 29. He's seeking a six-year term. What's going to happen here in the remaining 3 weeks of the campaign? Are the Arizona Republicans going to turn on John McCain? What do you think is going to be the political fallout here?
No, it remains to be seen. I mean, there's an interesting question here. I'd love to have servicemen, the families of servicemen, go and ask John McCain some of these events he's doing. He is campaigning in his state. First of all, I think 80 years old and to want to be a U.S. senator again is a very long time to be a U.S. senator, just for starters. But so there were already questions about the wisdom of John McCain running again, and whether or not it's time to let somebody else step in. But I think it's very important to get the full story of what actually happened there, because what else have we been told about John McCain and John McCain's past that we don't know to be true now. This raises a very serious character issue. We should note that many of the people listening here, myself included, John McCain was the first presidential vote I ever cast in 2008, and so there are lots of us who supported him, financially, supported him with our resources, canvassing for him in 2008, and it's very disturbing.
Charles, do you think the establishment news media will cover this story, or are they going to circle the wagons around John McCain and cover up this story?
It's an interesting question. We've gotten a lot of since we discussed that we were going to break this story together, Researcher and True News. We've gotten a lot of interest out there from other journalists. We spoke today with people from the National Enquirer. Daily Mail knows about it.
Daily Mail in London?
The Daily Mail in London. It's kind of sad in a way that some of the best journalism that's done in the United States is done by Brits. But what can we do?
Hey, listen, for years I've gotten my best news from Great Britain.
What bothers me the most about this is that it raises so many questions. I mean, was John McCain the Republican nominee because the military and the CIA had something on him? This is an interesting question. I mean, this is why whenever I break stories that are of sexual nature, like we did with Kevin McCarthy, stopping him from being Speaker of the House, we don't want people to be blackmailed. We don't want them to be in a position where they can be extorted by our enemies. And so this is a serious concern. Because
we know, Charles, another charge that has come up over the years has been that John McCain is the Manchurian candidate, that he was programmed in North Vietnam. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we know that John McCain was one of the worst pilots that the Navy has ever seen. That he graduated in the bottom of his class at Annapolis, or near the bottom of his class.
He flew 23 missions.
It's true. I mean, there are other people who've flown lots of other a lot more missions. I mean, I think he's totaled 3 planes.
And wasn't there an incident with USS Forrestal
yes.
where there was a fire?
Yes.
That seems to be in my memory there somewhere that he was involved with.
Yes, he was involved with that fire there. It's interesting. So my grandfather was a rear admiral when the Navy crossed for the largest fire at the Battle of Honshu Island that had occurred on an aircraft carrier. And John McCain was involved in the second, largest fire. I think actually it ultimately displaced it. So,
by the way, John McCain's father was an admiral, and his father was in charge of the official investigation into the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty.
That's
and
right.
Many people believe that Admiral McCain covered up what the Israelis did to American sailors. Because I interviewed an American sailor that was on the Liberty, and what he told me was shocking, of how the Israelis bombed the Liberty and then continued to circle the ship and with machine guns shoot the wounded sailors on the deck of the Liberty.
There's never been an account made of that Liberty incident. There's never really been a reconciliation with what happened there. And it's unfortunate. I mean, the United States and Israel are allies, but there's never really been a discussion about what actually happened there that's been open to the public.
It's just interesting that McCain's father was the man in charge of that investigation. And are Admiral McCain's records sealed also?
Parts of it are missing.
They're missing.
Whether we want to say sealed or not, it's
missing.
It's on. Now, we should be fair here because a lot of this material was done in the pre-digital age, right? I mean, a lot of the material that we're talking about here, dates from the 1960s, 1970s. This is this was a pre-internet age. But what I can't understand is, so John McCain is the chairman of the Armed Services Subcommittee in the U.S. Senate, and he has gone well out of his way to go after Bo Bergdahl for desertion,
right?
In Afghanistan. He's been very hard on, he's tried to presented himself as a very aggressive, a very, a supporter of the troops. And this raises a lot of questions about his sort of political brand. John McCain has always made a big deal about his service record. He's used it as a weapon against presidential candidate, Donald Trump. It's been used by his children repeatedly, including Meghan McCain, who's sort of a columnist right now. And it's been used over and over and over again. And it's never really, we're supposed to just sort of listen and believe all of the stories that he's told over the years, and there are lots of questions about them now that really need to be addressed. And
Well, I want to see if CNN and Fox News and the Washington Post and the New York Times and the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune, I want to see if Breitbart News and Drudge Report and the whole media establishment out there, I want to see if they pick up this True News exclusive and report what we just reported on this edition of True News.
Well, we can pray for that. I mean, we can always encourage people to be guided. I mean, this is a betrayal of the public trust of a high order. It's not lightly that we make these claims. They're certainly subject. John McCain is free to sue me for libel or for defamation for being involved in this. And of course, truth is a defense against libel and defamation. So I suspect that there won't be a lot of attention brought to it.
What criticisms do you anticipate in the release of this revelation?
Well, there'll be an attitude that this is not a big deal. They'll point to John McCain saying in a 2008 speech that he was broken. There was an interview that he did, but he said merely that he signed a statement. He didn't talk about all the other interviews he did with the Cubans. There's a lot more material here than simply just the broadcast, which was we believe to be played multiple times. And what I think is so alarming about this is Congressman Bob Dornan. I believe he's since passed away of Orange County. He was very aggressively trying to pursue this matter, and my concern and the concern of Sidney Schomburg is New York Times columnist. My concern is that the POW issue and covering up what happened to the POWs and keeping their records sealed was a negotiating tactic that was used in the Treaty of Paris to sort of end the Vietnam War. And what ended up happening is we left people behind. And so this is a chapter in American history. It was sort of one of the longest military engagements that we've ever been in. And so we've covered up a lot of what actually happened there. And it's extremely disturbing to think about what else we might not know about that period. And to think that John McCain has been at the center of the national discourse on the military. He's gotten security briefings, that he's always been in a position where he could have been blackmailed on this question is disturbing. I don't go so far as to claim the Manchurian Candidate things. I think that may go too far. There's still a lot of questions that still need to be addressed.
Well, my major complaint with John McCain, greater than his support for amnesty for illegal immigrants. But the thing that makes me furious about John McCain has been his involvement in the war in the Middle East, where he has been part of the war machine that has funneled money and weapons and ammo to the so-called rebels, which are nothing other than jihadists that are attacking the government of Syria, of President Assad. John McCain has been up to his eyeballs in that war, which means he knows that he's helping ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And he knows that they are killing Christians in Syria and Iraq. And I cannot let this man get off without being called down and challenged for that despicable act. And I will never, ever let that man get away with what he did. Christians have died. He has helped Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton turn the Middle East into a nightmare where hundreds of thousands, literally millions of people have been uprooted and dislodged from their homes, cities bombed and destroyed, churches bombed and destroyed, pastors impaled on crosses, Christian children sawed in half, Christian moms and dads crucified on crosses, and John McCain's hands are dripping with Christian blood.
That's right.
So maybe Almighty God today is revealing the truth about John McCain.
It's interesting when you go and you look through John McCain's contributors that have given to this 2016 campaign. He's got a lot of money that he's gotten since 2012. over $4 or $5 million, and much of it comes from groups that depend upon globalization. There's the Blackstone group in there. There's Elliott Management, which is of course connected to Paul Singer, who's the billionaire who's backing up Paul Ryan. And of course, there's all the different military contractors. There's Raytheon. There's General Atomics. Um, there's a lot of serious questions about how John McCain profits from these sort of engagements. I mean, John McCain has been in favor of, intervening militarily in a great number of countries: Russia, Iran, Syria, Burma, um, all throughout Africa. And so we really have to be aware of John McCain's past here as a way of understanding. And John McCain has had a series of sort of being on the wrong side of issues, that are, things like amnesty, of course, but climate change, global warming, alarmism. We've seen him categorically, McCain-Feingold, of course, famously, where he was in favor of speech restrictions that would bar the kind of independent broadcasts that we're doing
Right.
today.
Yeah.
And so he's got a history here. And he's got a history of the Keating 5 scandal, of course, which has been somewhat forgotten. He was very close to Jack Abramoff, who, of course, was brought down. So he's got a history of sort of getting by. And one of the ways he protects himself from any and all criticism is he pretends that he's a war hero, that he is this great and noble man. And my grandfather earned the Navy Cross. He went to Annapolis. He did not graduate bottom of his class. You can look it up, Dwight Lyman Johnson. And there are many, many people, including some of the people who are in this room, who serve the country and who don't use it as a political weapon against their adversaries, and who did it out of love of country and not out of personal enrichment or growing their larger relationships. And so it's very disturbing. My fear on this issue, I think we're at a stage now where you can't cover everything up as you once were able to, because the internet makes it so that people can hear for themselves this broadcast. They can do their own investigations. I encourage people, as I say at all these things, to email me, Charles at WeSearcher or editor at Got News if they've got their own investigations. If it's very good, I'll end up hiring you. And so I'm very much of the view that the people are now becoming the media when it comes to these things. And what I have found disturbing over the years is just the sheer number of people who've come to me, said, John McCain was a songbird. Why is nobody listening about this? Why is nobody talking about this? And it's a perennial kind of thing. And it raises all kinds of questions about all of the different decisions he's made over the years, that I think it's time that McCain, who, promised to build us a fence, build the dang fence. That was his ad in 2010 when he was walking with, the controversial sheriff Paul Babu on the border there. He was, and by the way, Paul Babu is, a gay man who slept with an illegal immigrant at the same time he was supposedly defending the territory of the United States as a sheriff. So John McCain has a history of people who he associates with who have not always had the interests of the sovereignty of the United States or of the people as a whole. And hopefully, if he wins the election, and he's under 50 in the polling, but if he wins the election, hopefully we've now taken away something so he can actually be more truthful. I mean, we should be.
Well, most likely, Charles, the Democrats will pick up the Senate seat. If Kelly Ward does not defeat him in the primary August 30th,
That seems likely.
The Democrats will pick up the Arizona Senate seat in November.
Right.
And what difference would it make? I mean, to quote Hillary Clinton, John McCain has, on every issue, has been on the other side of it.
All right.
There are very few that he's been.
Well, listen,
on the other side.
that's it for today's edition of True News. You have heard something that nobody has heard anywhere in the world except American soldiers in Vietnam in the late 60s. They heard John McCain on North Vietnamese Communist radio, but nobody else has heard it. True News, thanks to Charles Johnson and WeSearchR.com, who brought this audio to us. We have worked together on this project, and we wanted to get this to you today. Again, an unheard of audio. First time anybody has ever heard a recording of John McCain as a POW on North Vietnamese communist radio, attempting to demoralize the American troops in Vietnam. And you've heard it for the first time on True News. Make up your own mind what you want to do with this. I believe this recording will go viral. We will have a printed article on our website, and